Hi, my name's Darren Humphreys and welcome to Alifereal. I'm here in Christchurch in New Zealand where it's currently 12:28 on Saturday morning, and joining me today are...
Paul Boone from England, Manchester. It's currently 1:29 in the morning, and this is my good wife Victoria Boon. We have two children. One has Angelman syndrome, Sebastian, who's 9, and we have another 6-year-old called Harrison Boone as well.
Great, and if you're joining us, you are learning about stories from the journey, and today we want to talk just a little bit about the beginnings of the story from the journey, and then hear something from both Paul and Vicky about their journey as well. There are a number of things just wanted to share. Paul and I both have sons whose lives are impacted by Angelman syndrome, and it was not long after my son Elijah died, sadly, in 2007, that I first encountered Paul and Vicky on the internet somewhere, whether Facebook or something, and we've continued to journey over that time and wanted to start Alifereal to share stories from the journey that help give hope to those who are on the journey. Paul, you want to share something about how the whole idea of Alifereal and something about London Real as well?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, Darren, it's obviously as we've had touch points of over the years, and we've gone through our own experiences and we've gone on our own journeys, and we've talked very much, about what our own experiences have been. As we've broadened the community of AS people, and we've gotten to know more and more people, you start to hear and share more and more experiences of people have had on their journeys. And for me, the concept of Alifereal is actually bringing those people together in this kind of format, in a web format, and allowing them to share their journeys, the things that have impacted them, what it was like to receive diagnosis, for example, how having an individual with AS impacts them and their family unit, what their coping mechanisms are, what kind of things they have challenges with, and how they get over them challenges as well. From the outset, when you speak to people and you say, well, you've got a disabled child, you do tend to hear, oh, I'm very sorry to hear about that. But it's amazing to see and hear really how resilient individuals can be in terms of the experiences they have and how they progress and go forward and just mature within themselves and find just that something deep down within themselves to carry on their journey, and each hurdle just leads to another hurdle, and I find that people being able to share those experiences with those who are newer on the journey, who maybe don't have quite as much experience or don't quite know, what's about to come up to them in the future, as their Angelman's individuals go through the ages, go through the maturities. We can impart just some of those journeys, and people can take some lessons learned from that, or just take some words of hope and some words of encouragement. And that's really where Alifereal's from, Darren. This is going to be our first interview. Vicky is really more of a pilot for us, really, to see that this format works. And we've got a list of names, Darren, really interesting names of people around the AS community that everybody will know, who are willing to share their journey with us. And Darren, what we'd like to do is to be able to say to people, if you want to share your journey, contact Darren Humphreys or contact myself, and what we'll do is we'll gladly sit down and we'll go through this format and we'll conduct interviews with people who are willing to share their journeys, or they want to share a specific message, or they want to talk about a specific something specific about Angelman's, or how it can impact or touch upon other Angelman's families that can add value, but they're willing to share. We're completely open to taking those stories and those journeys and sharing them with everybody else. Over to you, Darren.
That's great, Paul. I wondered whether there were anyone with names like Throckmorton perhaps on the list of people that we might be interviewing.
Well, we've got quite a list of names, Darren. And there are some people, who we're still waiting to hear back from. But if I just throw a few names out for you, Darren, we've got a gentleman here in the UK by the name of Dan Hasley. He's a newly diagnosed parent. And I'd just love to hear about Dan's journey. because Dan's, as I say, recently diagnosed. He's going through the beginnings of the process, you know, and so that's, for me, that's a really fresh perspective. You know, I think some people, you know, have had different diagnosis experiences as the actual techniques and the methods of diagnosis have matured over the years. And then we've got Charles de Braun, who's an AS father. I think you'll be familiar with Charles, Darren?
Yeah, good mate from Quebec in Canada.
Mike Ross, and I'm just going to throw a few other names out very quickly so we can progress this. Kelly Ellison, I think, you know, some people may recognise Kelly from Angels on Earth. I don't know if you're familiar with the Angels on Earth, the organisation that Kelly has, as well as the likes of Paul Evans, who's agreed, and we've got Tom and Vanessa Amoroso, who've also agreed. Joe Catullo. We've got some real nice names, real good personalities. We've got some real good experiences from all of those people. Hoping to, you know, touch base with them and, you know, just hear about their journeys and what they've got to say and what their messages are as well. You know, and I'm looking forward to each and every single one of them, Darren. I think it's going to be a really good journey.
Oh, you're right about that, Paul, and I think often people think that their journey isn't really important. They live a pretty boring and a pretty ordinary sort of life. But we'll be really surprised the impacts of our sharing about our lives, and what they have on other people. They give them courage and they give them hope. And they, you know, the more we shine and the more we share our stories, the greater permission it gives other people to do so. And so, without further ado, I'm actually going to steal the microphone from you, and I'm going to introduce your lovely wife, Vicky. One of the Paul and I connected as, I guess, as dads of dad to sons, Angelman syndrome. But one of the things that that really impressed me in getting to know Vicky was she was willing to be known as Trillian. Now, the thing about Trillian is that Trillian is this funky, good-looking, long-haired, blonde character in a book and then in a movie called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, an English author. And I love the fact that I could tease Vicky a little bit that she shouldn't drink any more than 2 or 3 pangalactic gargle blasters unless she was a 40-ton elephant with bronchial pneumonia. And so there's this wonderful sort of connection there, just along that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm not sure how much Paul shares that, but it's really great that that we'll be able to sort of share an interest in those sorts of weird and wonderful things. And so, Vicky, it's great to have you with us today, all the way on the other side of the world. And Paul and I have been rabbiting on a bit, and you know, it's been a bit of a bloke's chat about things to do with dads and stuff. Take us back a few years now to when, maybe just prior to the diagnosis of Angelman syndrome with Sebastian, and tell us a little bit about how you were feeling and a little bit about the process of that diagnosis and how you experienced that, if you would.
Well, Darren, it's really interesting to kind of go back to birth, because there was something not quite right at birth. Sebastian screamed louder, like he was being tortured when he was hungry. He would feed for hours on end, to a point where I just wouldn't leave the house. My feelings for Sebastian were rocketing. Nobody else could touch Sebastian. Sebastian was the most precious thing that, you know, ever lived, ever was. Nobody was allowed to touch him other than me, because in case anybody hurt him. Maybe it was hormones, maybe it was another sense that something was wrong. It was only months after that started to calm down. But the love when he was born and the protection from me was off the scale. It was quite scary, and even midwives had a concern, but they thought that somehow they'd never seen anything quite like it. Usually you hear about mums who don't connect with babies and they show concerns for the mum and for the child, whereas everybody else had concerns for their own safety. And touching Sebastian, because I would just like go wild at them because nobody else was allowed to touch him other than me.
There was some idiosyncrasies in terms of Sebastian's feeding, which put us in touch with the first ever paediatrician, and that paediatrician, certainly for an early part of the journey, came with us almost, but the feeding kind of kicked off a lot of the activity, didn't it? You just want to talk through some of the feeding activity?
It did. Sebastian was breastfed. He would feed around about an hour and a half, and then 20 minutes later he would be hungry again. So we had quite a few concerns, and a lot of concerns were kind of thrown at us with weight gain and that we weren't feeding him enough. And then Sebastian also exhibited breathing issues where he would suddenly stop breathing. At that point, he was taken to hospital. They thought he was having some sort of chest infection. They put him on the normal machines to test for oxygen levels and realised that he was stopping breathing. And that was on our first step to having a paediatrician and monitoring his skills, his
overall well-being, wasn't it?
His overall well-being. And then we had obstacles like general doctors that you would normally see for coughs and colds and ailments, who would say that we were neglecting Sebastian and we weren't feeding him and we weren't talking to him, we weren't playing with him, we were just leaving him, and therefore his behaviour and his development was obviously not up to the milestones where it should have been. So we had all Sebastian's little, well, major issues, and also all these new people coming into our lives saying that we were neglecting Sebastian, not talking to him, and that was a real emotional roller coaster, from going from a perfectly beautiful, healthy baby boy to these few issues in the first few weeks, and then suddenly being in hospital and having all these concerns kind of thrown at us. It was a very stressful time.
That's quite a journey, and particularly hearing those things from professionals must have made you, particularly as a mum, when you were talking about feeling protective, almost want to feel overprotective. And you know, I could see the potential that you would, you know, there might be a few people you would want to give a, you know,
yeah,
a bit of a whack to. Was there a point for you when there was a shift in that for you with people and with understanding? Was that something that someone said, hang on, let's investigate Angelman syndrome, or investigate something in particular that helped bring those things into perspective?
Yeah, there was. Sebastian had reached 11 months old under the care of a paediatrician who kept on saying to me, "You're doing a great job. He will develop. He's just a lazy little boy." I would go in with issues of people calling round, accusing us, and he would phone them up and say, "Leave them alone. There's nothing wrong. They're doing a great job. He's developing, but very, very slowly."
Could you just clarify, when you say accusing us, what were people? I think accusing us is probably a bit of a strong terminology, but you just want to tell us what their concerns were, and then how that led it going into the, you know, into The diagnosis.
Their concerns were Sebastian wasn't mumbling, he wasn't babbling, he wasn't saying mama, he wasn't saying dada, he wasn't sitting up straight, he wasn't holding his own head, he wasn't up to the milestones that they would classify as a 6-month-old baby, a 7-month-old baby, a 9-month, a 10-month, and so on. So it's all very regimented, you know, the scales that a baby should be developing at, and Sebastian wasn't making those milestones.
So at what point then did somebody say, well, you know, I've recognised something here which could take us in a different direction? So what happened with that? Who was it? And then tell us about the diagnosis itself.
We were discharged from Dr. Dixit, who was initially very helpful, and we were left in the care of the community. So we had a physio, and we had a speech and language therapist to help Sebastian with any speech problems. And after a couple of months, we had a physio come to the house, and she wasn't too happy with what she was seeing from Sebastian. Sebastian wasn't sitting right, he had a low muscle tone, he wasn't coordinating properly. So she referred us to another paediatrician within our area, and her name was Dr. Pike. And we went into Dr. Pike's office, we introduced Sebastian, happy little boy who was happy to be with people, and she said that Sebastian again wasn't developing up to those regimented milestones, and she offered us a blood test. And at first we refused because we thought, well, he's happy, you know, he's loving, he's our little baby boy, and he will develop in time. He's just a lazy little boy. And then we had a progression meeting 6 weeks later to see how he had progressed, and he hadn't. So she offered us a blood test again, and we opted for the blood test. And a month later, it came back, and she said it was something to do with his chromosome 15. She knew that we had done lots of research to try and spur Sebastian on with his development. We had tried to look at techniques into getting him to sit up via the internet. So she was quite happy to send us away, knowing full well that there was something wrong with Sebastian's chromosome 15, and for us to go and search on the internet. And we did. And what we found was 2 different syndromes. We found Prader-Willi syndrome, and we also found Angelman syndrome. And we self-diagnosed Sebastian. And that was the start of the journey of Angelman syndrome.
Wow, that's being sent away from a paediatrician with a glimpse of something, but not having that helpful information around maybe Angelman syndrome from the paediatrician. I guess I'm a bit gobsmacked by that, to be honest with you. But then I guess it's then led you to do that additional research and find those sorts of things. Tell us then, what happened? Did you think, were there things around either Prader-Willi or Angelman syndrome that you thought did match Sebastian, and so did you take those things back to the paediatrician again and say, I think, and have that further confirmed?
Yeah. 1 month later, after researching chromosome 15 and everything that we could gather over the internet, we went back to her office and she asked us, what did we find and we said, well, it could either be Prader-Willi, which we've looked at, and we don't think it is, because Sebastian doesn't have the traits of being quite addicted to food.
He didn't show all the usual characteristics that were defined as part of the Prader-Willi, did he?
No, he didn't.
He didn't meet the
criteria of Prader-Willi. However, when we looked at Angelman syndrome, other than what we read back then about the blue eyes and the blonde hair, Sebastian met all the characteristics of AS. And she confirmed with a further test that she'd done that Sebastian was actually has Angelman syndrome. And I think it was better for us to it was a relief to know, but it wasn't. I think it was a relief for both of us to know. However, we weren't shocked because we'd already done that diagnosis, so we weren't crying in a doctor's office with the unknown being thrown at us by a doctor. We had done all our research at home already. We had gotten over it. We'd had a cry that lasted maybe about half an hour. We had looked at some of the articles online, seen some of the worst of AS, and however, the difference was we had Sebastian, and he was still the baby that we were handed 18 months earlier.
So, sure. Well, was there...
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Paul.
No, I was just going to ask Darren, just in terms of... So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, which is why I'm asking the question now, is that your coping mechanism now, obviously we'd been led down that garden path. She'd said to us the chromosome 15. Mutually together, we'd gone away and we'd looked at chromosome 15. So, you talk about, there was moments of shock and there was moments of, where we did have cries, and I think we had cries separately as well as actually having cries together as well. And, I just want to bring Darren back in on that very shortly as well in terms of how Darren played a part in our journey. But, what was your thought process around, well, here we've got a diagnosis. 18 months ago, we were given a perfectly happy, healthy baby. We've now got a diagnosis of AS. What were your expectations? And how did you get over from, what could be perceived as a negative? I mean, I know we don't perceive it maybe as a negative now, but, what was that transition for you in terms of bad news, coping?
I think the positive was Sebastian. He was still the baby that I was handed. He was still the happy little boy that he was the day before diagnosis. Nothing had changed. The challenges were still there. The only difference was that none of these so-called medical professionals who were saying that we weren't talking to him were actually scrubbed out of the picture completely, and we were left with professionals that knew exactly what they were doing and how they could help us and how they could be there for the family and do the right job for us rather than the wrong people being involved.
So it's about having the right plans in the right place. And did that help make you feel much more comfortable, or was it the fact, I don't want to put words in your mouth here again, I'm sorry, and pull me up at any point, but is it about the fact you felt vindicated in terms of the way that you'd been made to feel before diagnosis, to then receiving diagnosis and knowing, actually, I knew something was wrong earlier, those medical professionals were wrong, I knew something else was wrong, but now actually I have vindication in terms of, well, you say it in your own way,
I had suspicions that there was something not quite right, but he was our first child. We'd never been parents before, and everything was a learning experience from day one. However, having Sebastian being so happy, so joyous, such a pleasure to be around, there was never any problem to have a child like that. So when we had a diagnosis, we felt that we were proven innocent, we were vindicated from any accusations that were kind of put across at the beginning. However, there was never a shock. I never see the diagnosis as a negative, because to me Sebastian was perfect the day before the diagnosis to the day after diagnosis. He was still the same child. Nothing had changed. It was just a name that was on his file next to his health details. Nothing had changed.
A pigeonhole for a condition almost.
It was a pigeonhole for a condition, and he was the same little boy. All I wanted and all I dreamt about for him was for him, one, to be happy and to do what he wanted in life. And that could have been a bin man, that could have been a pilot, that could have been a doctor. And to have a little boy who was so happy and only see the good in the world was it wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
So, can I go on? Sorry, Darren, I do apologise. You go ahead, Darren.
I was going to interrupt and say, for those of you who are listening, we're talking today on Alifereal. This is just a little commercial. And if you like what you're hearing and you want to hear some more in the future, down below there's a subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Please feel free to ask any questions or to make any comments down here below as well, because it's really helpful and encouraging to have those. If you want to hear more today, my name's Darren Humphries, and you know I'm in Christchurch in New Zealand, and we're talking with Paul and Vicky Boone from Manchester in the UK. Back to you, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Darren. So, and thank you for the advert there. Very good. So, you know, we've just spoken, Darren, you know, to Vicky about, you know, what the impacts were at the point of diagnosis. And I would like to think and feel, certainly from a personal point of view, that we were very much integrated, and we felt the same things, we thought the same things, and we had those aspects. From a wider family point of view, you know, how was the diagnosis received by the wider family? You know, how did you break the news to the family? How did you prepare them for it, and how supportive were they? And did you have to educate people, or you take it away?
Once we looked on the internet, after we were told that there was a problem with chromosome 15, we approached family members, quite close family members, and we told them of our findings, and they were completely in denial. They didn't want to think that Sebastian had any sort of problem. They were saying that the experts had got it wrong and there must have been a mistake, and he will catch up to his peers. My brother was quite understanding, although he'd never heard of the condition, so we had to educate him, and we gave him information, and we spoke quite a lot to him and his girlfriend. And they were quite understanding, although quite taken back by the diagnosis of something that they'd never heard of before. And I think the wider family heard about it from second hand from parents who didn't quite have their head around the diagnosis in the first place. So we had to educate a lot of the family members.
I think over the course of the years there's been a lot of educating and re-educating people in regards to Angelman syndrome, the condition, and you know what some of the symptoms of Angelman syndrome are, and in some cases where you know we've had some kind of help or support looking after Sebastian, we've had to remind them almost in terms of what they need to do. You know, so I suppose, you know, just kind of like wind just that small part up there, you know, it was difficult for people to come to terms with.
It was.
And there was some denial, I think, from parents, and I think even, you know, from my own aspect, my own mum, there was a bit of denial in there. Don't worry, it's a phase, it'll pass, we've got it wrong.
It's an illness.
It's
They'll give him some medicine and he'll get better. But there was even those who hadn't met Sebastian, who we'd verbally tried to educate. I don't think it actually set in. And these are relatives that maybe you see once a year or maybe once every couple of years, that when they meet Sebastian, and Sebastian has got that much bigger, and he flaps a lot and he giggles a lot and he likes to knock over glasses of water and pull at wires, there's still kind of, the shock is still there. You know, they met Sebastian, you know, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and suddenly this tall little boy has been wheeled into a room where he wants to cause absolute destruction. And
so the traits that he portrays, I mean, does he have that kind of, you know, headlocking people and not wanting to let go?
The hair. He's Sebastian is he's a compulsive flirt, and if he sees a pretty girl with long hair waving it around in front of him and he feels the need to give her a cuddle, he will pull hair and get her to come down to his level for him to give her a good cuddle. So taking him to family functions where there's little girls dancing around on a dance floor was a good experience for everybody.
It's almost like you've got to do a risk assessment, isn't it?
Definitely, please, you know, don't come near him, you know, arm's length, you know, otherwise, you know, we're not going to apologise for his actions. So yeah, meeting him, for those family members, so those distant family members at family functions, birthdays, discos, has definitely been more of an education than handing them a piece of paper saying this is what the future holds and this is how Sebastian's going to be. He may look cute at 18 months with lots of curls and lots of smiles. However, he's going to turn into a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, and, you know, one day he'll be 20, you know, hopefully 25, 30, and he's going to be tall and he'll want to just hug everybody and knock down glasses of whatever, pull wires, pull pictures off the wall. He's going to be a menace. Hopefully.
Well, that's quite an education, particularly for our families, isn't it? And it often takes lots of effort for us as well. And sometimes we find that people who we thought were actually close to us sometimes bail or make some distance or maybe casually avoid those invites that they might have been invited to. Tell us, Vicky, about some people who you found really supportive and encouraging, maybe some other people who've been on the journey, particularly with Angelman syndrome before you. Tell us about some of those people and how they encouraged and had a positive impact on your journey for you and Paul.
And if I can just add to that, Darren, what I want to do, or my question to Vicky was, who was her first AS contact, and you know, what was that experience like, suddenly having somebody, as you say, Darren, who may be supportive and encouraging? So I'm coming in from the same angle as well, so go for it.
Our first contact was yourself, Darren, and we spoke at length. All about Angelman syndrome and about Sebastian and his little quirky ways, and then we asked you about Elijah, and you had given us the information that Elijah had gone to the better place in the sky, and that was heartbreaking. I think me and Paul, we cried for days. and
it had an immediate impact to us, because that was our first. You were our first contact, Darren. You know, and I think we're all just getting a bit welled up now, actually, because you know I think it's a very important part of the journey, because you know, we'd been on quite a journey, we'd been on quite a transition, and I'm not trying to step in here, but I'm just going to try to help you pull yourself together just for a moment. You know, in our first contact, we'd spoken to Darren on the ASF forum. I think a lot of people will be familiar with the Angelman Foundation forum. I think it was John Hannigan, Darren, who set up that, and we met on the web chat. You know, I'd said to you, would you mind speaking to my wife later on? It was it was the first contact we'd actually had with Darren, and Darren explained to us exactly what was going on in terms of, you know, Angelman syndrome, his experiences of Angelman syndrome, and then he got to the point, you know, where, you know, Elijah sadly, and quite recently as well, passed on, and I think that was the first time we had to get over a hurdle. It was a big hurdle for us, wasn't it? I think it impacted us more than the diagnosis itself, wasn't it, really?
I think it had such a massive impact on us both. You know, we met you, Darren, online, and you were such a cool cat about things, and you were a really, really positive person. And then when we started asking questions about Elijah, you know, he sounded absolutely awesome, and then you told us what had happened, and our hearts broke for everybody where you are. And I think it was a realization of the negatives that can come along with AS. We were thinking of all the positives. We were looking at Sebastian just as Sebastian, and trying kind of with blinkers. It was like, okay, they've said he's got Angelman syndrome, and you know, we'll get over that. It's still Sebastian. And then we met yourself, and it was like, you know, this is a cool guy. You know, he knows his stuff. You know, he can, you know, he can guide us. And then we spoke about Elijah, and I think it took us quite some time to kind of get over that news.
No, absolutely.
I think even now, you know, part of our hearts belong to him and to you.
I think, you know, as part of that, I think, and I'll speak for myself, I don't want to speak for yourself, for me it kind of framed the importance of the journey that we're on, and the fact that we had to make, and again, it's my own words, and so you can disagree with me, but it was about making it the best journey we could possibly make it, and doing the things that we felt that we could do to make it as good, because we didn't know. And, you know, we had to qualify Darren's experience and the things that he'd been through in terms of, you know, sorry, I just let me pan back out there so you're just not looking at Victoria. So that we actually know, you know, that we knew we had to make the most of it. We didn't know how much time we had, and we still don't. And I think we both carry, as parents mutually, mortality fears. But nonetheless, we do try, you know, with our friendship with Darren, to kind of just make it the best journey we can, and sharing your experience, Darren, and trying sharing everybody else's experience as well. So it's not an experience we want to take away. It actually informed our journey, and I think it made our journey change our journey, I think, to be fair, actually, because we were, you know, it made us made us be much more positive about the ways that we wanted to deal and cope and manage Angelman syndrome, and the individuals we were meeting and the people we were talking to. So you were the first contact, Darren. But in terms of yourself, Vicky, you know, Darren was our first touch point. Then let's talk about the wider AS community, and about, you know, here in the UK there's the ASSERT, Angelman Syndrome Support and Education Research Trust, or angelman.org, if you want to go on angelmanuk.org, sorry, and about the impact that they had and about the information they sent through and the value they've added since diagnosis. Because we, very shortly after Darren, we started to contact a cert and go into a cert.
We did. So during our journey, we obviously publicised Sebastian's diagnosis with friends. We lost quite a lot of friends in that journey. People who wanted to keep us at arm's length and people who just wanted to sever any connection with us. So it was nice to find connections with other people who had been on our journey, who had been where we were, and that then began in person with a cert. And we made the phone call, and I had a discussion with Rachel Martin about Sebastian, and we met up, at the Trafford Centre, which is a nearby, very expensive shopping centre. And I had Sebastian in a little buggy that was fur-lined to keep him nice and snug, and I'd brought along a load of fruit to keep him busy and keep him full and not screaming at me or throwing things out the pram. And I met Rachel Martin, and I met her two other children. I hadn't actually met another AS individual at that point, so meeting another adult who had kind of gone through the diagnosis was really, really helpful. It was really informative, and it was nice to make another friend. It was nice to make a friend who knew what was going on in our lives and who could be understanding of the fact that I wouldn't be ready at 9 o'clock for a coffee morning because I'd been up all night and maybe had an hour and a half sleep, or somebody who understood that actually my 2-year-old then wasn't walking, wasn't talking yet, who had slimed half my hair with dribble, and they didn't mind what I looked like. It didn't matter because they knew exactly what we were going through.
That's really great. I think one of the bonuses for us was not long after Elijah was diagnosed with Angelman syndrome. I'm a pretty outgoing sort of personality, and so whilst Julie did quite a bit of research about Angelman syndrome and about the impacts of those, I was really keen to meet some other families. And I think there's something about not needing to explain yourself to other families and to actually see their children as well and go, wow, I'm not the only one. Although you might have conversations with people who are online or, the connection with me. And I do remember that. And it's part of, I guess, Elijah's legacy, I would say, is to continue to share and do a bunch of those things on the journey. And, I would have hoped that at the time of sharing those things that being at the other end of the journey, that there's some hope that regardless of the length of time that not only our kids, but even you or I have on this earth, that we know that we live life, but we don't just live life in fear of those things happening because, I don't know, we might go out the door and get run down by a bus this week, next week, in 20 years, 30, 50 years time or whatever. And but there's something tangible, isn't there, about seeing someone else's child actually act a little bit like your child. Or one of the things that just a little anecdote, I was in a large shopping complex, and it was a single, big beams across the top, and we call it the warehouse in New Zealand, and people in the States call it Targets and things. Anyway, big warehouse, things that are a bit cheaper. And I heard this laughter, and I had to track down the laughter. And I knew without a doubt, without even having met the child, that that individual had Angelman syndrome, because I recognised it, and the memories of what Elijah's laugh are, or other individuals were there. So I guess it becomes a little bit like being able to spot a child with Angelman syndrome at 50 yards, or being able to hear. Whoops. Much in demand today. Being able to hear those sorts of things. So I think probably as parents, hearing and recognising those things meant that it took you out of being that individual into feeling like you were part of a bigger family or a bigger community of people.
Yeah.
Touch point for you.
It did. My first meeting of a child with Angelman syndrome was a little girl called Millie. I hadn't met Rachel Martin's son yet, James. So I met Millie in the English version of Walmart, and it was the cafeteria. So I met her mum, Caroline Mason, and we had a coffee, and I met Millie, and she met Sebastian. And Sebastian again in his little buggy, lots and lots of curls, and I could instinctively recognise Millie from her giggles. And Millie could walk, and Millie was doing such a great job with communicating with others around her what she wanted. She was giggling to her mum, she was coming over and saying hello, and I think that gave us hope, because she was up on her feet, she was moving around, she was making the most of her mobility, she was able to get around, and that gave me hope, and it gave me inspiration for Sebastian, that he could one day get up on those feet and start walking, never mind sitting bolt upright and being able to balance, you know. Maybe one day he'll take those steps. And it was an uplift that one day he might be able to do that. So then after that, a whole community seemed to explode of meeting people and meeting their angels, and people having fundraisers, and then regional meetings, and then 18 months later it was the ASSERT conference, where we had left Sebastian at home with Grandma and Grandad while we visited our first Angelman's conference. And it was a big eye-opener. We met Ben Robertson, who, the first time we met him, he was ordering an Irish cream at the bar and telling the bar staff that his dad was going to pay. And to us, that was epic. That was, you know, we wanted Sebastian to be one day, you know, to be ordering alcohol in a pub and demanding that his dad pay for it. It was just the ideal, the dream, even though that's not technically a standard dream that you have of your 2-year-old ordering alcohol. You know, it was nice to see that there was independence with Ben, and it was nice to see that there was children there of maybe 2 and 3 with AS, all the way up to in their 50s with AS. And it was such a contrast of abilities, and it was lovely to see the fact that they were all giggling and they were all happy, and they all seemed to be so content with life that it's like all they saw was happiness.
It wasn't the children I felt most sorry for at the conference. It was really more the parents, because you could tell that most of them had just come away just to get some sleep and have a drink, wasn't it? Really, drink some more coffee. You know, but you know, Darren. But you know, just to come in onto what Vicky's saying there, it really was a big eye opener for us, because suddenly, you know, you're not having just individual touch points, you're having a mass touch point with a load of people who all share those same experiences. And I know, Darren, and I'm going to let you go and do another advert in a minute, Darren, really, about what, if people like it, then subscribe, hit the subscribe button, which is just below. But also, you know, there were so many commonalities in the journeys. There were so many similarities in the stories. There were so many, you know, I mean, you know, the amount of different people you could talk to, and they'd all share stories of poo parties. You know, they'd come in the morning and they've all had these horrible nightmares first thing in the morning, and suddenly you don't feel alone. You're able to express those kinds of things and say, you wouldn't believe what happened to me this morning, or guess what happened to us last night. You know. And it's the environmental thing as well, Darren. Is it, you know, being in an environment with people who share those kind of things, it really does just help bring a lot of that stress and a lot of that worry down, and you suddenly realise that, you know what, you're not on this journey on your own. You know, just going back into Vicky's journey there on Ben Robertson, I absolutely remember Bailey's, and you know, I spoke to Pam Robertson, who we'd spent quite a bit of time that weekend. I think it was 2008, was it? 2008, 2009? And, you know, Ben was just turned 18. He was striving for independence, and at that time his mum and his dad had tried to get him into independent living, so he was going to be going in with his best friend. You know, and that was a journey for them, and I'd love to get Pam on to, you know, maybe walk us and talk us through that experience, both from Ben's point of view and from them as a family point of view. But for Vicky and I, aspirationally for Sebastian, looking at, you know, Ben and what he could achieve and what he could do, I think that was very important for us. And I think leaving that very first conference, and I'll speak for myself, I don't want to speak for Vicky, I found it quite emotional, if I can be quite honest. I found it very hard leaving the people I'd just met and I'd built relationships with, and the people that you know, the people who you've come to know. I found it very difficult leaving the venue. You know, going home, I think I sat in silence the whole way home. It just had such a big impact on me. You know, maybe it wasn't even the lectures we'd taken place. It wasn't really the educational piece. It was about
the people.
It was about the people, and it's about the same about this Alifereal and stories for the journey. It is about exactly the people and about the experiences and that the human experience, Darren. You know, and I think that's the biggest thing I've taken away from it all. You know, with yourself, Darren, as well. You know, quite expressively, and you know, as you say, you know, we have grown quite close. But you know, Angelman syndrome has almost given, you know, me that and yourself that as well. Is that fair to say from your point of view? I mean?
Definitely. I think it's opened a whole world of people, good people who have travelled or are travelling on the same path, you know, we're on. They've either started after us or started before, and they have a wealth of information, and it's a very positive thing. And I would see life without that as being a very lonely life. You know, if you didn't have those contacts to say you're doing a fabulous job, or yeah, maybe you should try this, or maybe you should try a different medication, or here's an idea of putting sleep suits on backwards. I would never think of that. However, you know, people have advised other people to do that, and it's worked.
I think at the time that I see the Angelman's community come together the most, as well as, you know, times of tribulation and times of trouble as well. And you know, I think it's great that we see the communities do wrap ourselves quite openly around each other when we know that, you know, people are needing our prayers and our thoughts, and are needing those words of encouragement, and, you know, not just as individuals but also as part of a community. But the other times that I see people come together are usually around Christmas and birthdays, when people are asking, well, what do I get my angel for Christmas? What, you know, what are we going to get, and what toys can anybody recommend? And that's usually when you see some of the more interesting Angelman's posts coming out there, you know, randomness coming out there.
I think with
Paul, I'd like to. Sorry, can I just trial something? I just want to see if this is going to. Whoops. I just wanted to see if I could play back just our intro that we have for Alifereal, adding it to the play.
So, Darren, you've put yourself on mute currently, so while you've put yourself on mute, if you like what you've seen so far as part of the interview, do click the subscribe button. If you want to take part in the interviews and you want to share your journey, or you want to talk about a specific subject or topic, please feel free to contact Darren Humphreys or myself. We would love to speak to as many people as possible about any aspects of their journeys or even their whole journey. We're covering quite a lot here with my wife Victoria Boone. We're joined by Darren Humphreys in New Zealand. Currently here in the UK, it's 2:30 in the morning. I don't know what time it is there, Darren, but you know, this is Alifereal. It's stories from the journey. Darren, do you just want to pick up where you were talking about then?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure. Did that video play, Paul?
No, it didn't, Darren. No.
Oh, maybe for next time. It's just the intro, and I was just trialing something with the YouTube clip. Just in terms of time, we're almost probably out of time today, but I think Paul and I shared before, and Vicky, was some things to contribute to, just about the journey with some homeschooling with Sebastian at home. I think there's some. That's probably worthy of another discussion if that's good with you, Vicky. I just wondered if we would, as part of maybe rounding things off, and we'll try and keep our conversation within the hour today, just so it's just that bite size, because people get excited, and you know, we'll keep it within that. Tell me something, and maybe yourself, and maybe Paul. What are your aspirations for? You know, you did talk about some things for Sebastian as to the sort of person he is. There's a lot of talk out there in terms of, I'm going to use inverted commas, a cure or therapies that relieve things in relation to Angelman syndrome. Maybe just in conclusion, you could share some of your perspective and your thoughts in response to those possibilities.
Well, I think it's kind of quite a loose debate. If there is a cure, if there is a therapeutic, it would have to be proven to help Sebastian's specific AS type, so deletion. He has AS deletion. It would have to help him overall. We don't like medicating Sebastian. We would rather not medicate Sebastian. Medication has side effects, you know, it could be synthetic. So it would have to be proven that it could do some major things. However, then there's also the view that Sebastian was made the way he is, and to us, he's perfect. We see Sebastian as kind of like a pure soul. He was created a pure soul, and he will always be a pure soul. So to us, he's perfect. Then there comes an issue that when we do move on, whether it be tomorrow or whether it be in years to come, do we want to leave Sebastian non-verbal, potentially not being able to walk, not being able to know the bad or the good in people, not being able to protect himself? So it's a very, very big question to ask, and it would have to be proven, and it would have to come back with some very big results. Yeah, we don't want to leave Sebastian non-verbal and in a vulnerable place with no mum and dad who are willing to protect, or no mum and dad that are here to protect him.
I mean, I think we've shared earlier that, or so I mean, maybe I said it earlier, which is probably inappropriate for me really to speak about this now, but I think, you know, certainly for myself, I hold, you know, mortality issues, one for myself because I hold and harvest those fears in terms of, you know, when I go, how will Sebastian be able to cope. And for me, looking at the work that FAST have been doing, with the various institutions and the various professionals around the world, in order to identify potential cures and look for a route to market for those actual cures and therapeutics, it's that glimmer of hope, Darren. For me, I absolutely echo Vicky's thoughts and comments as well. It definitely has to be able to demonstrate, clear milestone leaps. That it's not just going to show us small non-value changes. The changes we want to see or impact would be major, but there's also, for me, that balancing up in terms of, well, what are those changes going to be? Sebastian's non-verbal, he suddenly becomes verbal.
It's about getting to know a brand new person.
It's a new person. He begins new life skills, so it's like getting to know a new person. And it's going to be very interesting, and it's certainly something that myself, Darren, I'm keeping a very close eye on. I'm really holding out here, for some really good stuff, and I know you're watching it with interest as well to see what it could potentially bring.
Yeah, I think I have some very big issues around it, because we have a lot of families coming into the AS community that are hearing cure. So they're not actually dealing with AS. They are looking at this glimmer of hope that's down this tunnel of, well, everything's going to be okay because there is a cure. And it's going to happen soon because I've been told by somebody it's going to happen soon. How soon that will be, it could be years down the line. Which country they'll be in, it all depends on, obviously, the drug standards people in that country. And the fact that this glimmer of hope is being shown to all these families who have been newly diagnosed that don't seem to want to discuss or accept AS. They'd rather not accept AS, but accept the fact that there is a cure out there, and their child of whichever type of AS is going to be cured and going to get up and walk and going to have a clear vocabulary and be able to have a typical normal life. And I think that for me is quite scary, because I honestly don't know how I would feel if somebody had presented the word cure to me when Sebastian was diagnosed. They would have had to have proven the same, I think, as now if somebody had said cure back then. However, I think going through the process of diagnosis and coping with lots of challenges, including seizures, the poo parties, the accidents, the damage that an AS individual can have on house, and even cats being strung up. I think it's quite scary just to hear new parents come into the equation and say, well, it's okay, there's a cure out there, so I don't have to deal with this. Or, I'm not willing to accept AS because there is a cure. And
is that in terms of long-term planning for the AS individuals over 5-10 years, or is that short interval, 1 year, 2 year? Can you just give a bit of context there?
I think it's quite. I've read lots of comments to say how unhappy these parents are with the diagnosis of AS, and how they're not willing to accept that because they've heard there's a cure. So whether that's short term or long term, the fact is, right now, right this minute, their child or their individual family member has Angelman syndrome. And that is, if they've had the blood test, if they've gone to a medical professional and had the diagnosis of Angelman syndrome, then that's what they've been told. That's the diagnosis they've been given. And for today, right now, they have AS, and I think it's quite upsetting to see so many people right now saying, well, I'm not going to accept AS because there is a cure, and I think that needs to be proven.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Vicky. Maybe I could just make a comment here now and say that Vicky's just expressing her experience, and that's really personal to herself. If you're watching this, you might choose to be upset by some of the things that Vicky has shared. I do ask you that you don't leave any rude, obnoxious or abusive comments down below, or you don't take it upon your personal self to direct those directly to towards Paul and Vicky. Vicky's highlighted a particular point of view and the experience that may or may not be shared by you. You know, I think, you know, there's that famous quote about I may not necessarily agree with what you've got to share, but I absolutely stand by and defend your right to be able to express that as well. So I'd appreciate that, you know, in the context of just as we're closing off today for this episode of Alifereal, telling stories from the journey, that that you're gracious towards the things that Vicky has said, particularly at the end, and perhaps there's an option that you could actually choose not to be offended by those things, or maybe those things are things that you could take away and let them sit with you. It's been great hearing from both yourself, Paul, and Vicky today about your story from the journey that helps to bring hope and courage and some of those things to people. Maybe just as we close, any final thoughts, Paul and Vicky?
Enjoy your AS individual. They're happy souls, and all they want to do is love.
Well, there you go. I mean, I absolutely, you know, I agree with Vicky. You know, show them love, show yourselves love more than that. I think actually more than that, isn't it?
And enjoy life.
No, indeed. If I can ask you a question, what would you, if you saw yourself 9 years ago? Sorry, 10 years ago, what would you tell yourself about this experience and this journey that you've been on?
I think from a personal point of view, nothing to do with AS.
Oh. We are here talking, but go on anyway if you must.
Don't buy the house.
Don't buy the house,
Other
right,
than
okay.
that, you know, you're going to have a little boy, his name's Sebastian, you know, he's going to have a few difficulties, but, you know, you get there, you know, you cope, and you'll be fine.
No, so if I can close off there as well, Darren, I just want to say thanks to my wife for sharing her story and her opinions. You know, this is, as I say, you know, this is a key pilot for us, Darren, and you know, if anybody does, you know, have any counter opinions and thoughts, and you want to share them with us in an interview with us and share their journey and share their hopes and aspirations, and you know, then please hit subscribe, send Darren or myself an email, get in touch. We'd love to hear everybody's points of views and opinions. There's a famous saying to say, you know, there's 101 ways to skin a cat, and I heard an alternative one which is about doing many things in many ways and not just to cats. So, you know, all viewpoints are welcome, you know. So, you know, if you want to be in touch with both Darren and I, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear from you. And really, Darren, that's it from me as well. I think that's been a nice story from Vicky's point of view on that journey.
Or perhaps I could pick up a very English saying, well, from here in New Zealand, that's a good night from me, it's a good night from him. Thank you, take care, and we'll see you next time on Alifereal.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.